Committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare recess at any time pursuant to Committee Rule 2, House Rule 11, Clause 2. The chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote is ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 3325, the Recruit and Retain Act, for purposes of a markup. I move that the committee report it favorably to the House. Clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3325.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are pleased to have H.R. 3325, the Recruit and Retain Act, before our committee today. The Recruit and Retain Act is about helping our men and women in blue, and I'm honored to be able to get this legislation through. This legislation passed the Senate by unanimous consent, and I'm proud to sponsor and lead this bill in the House along with my fellow committee member across the aisle, Mr. Glenn Ivey. To say something about Mr. Ivey, it's been an honor to work with him on this legislation and his staff. You don't see this very often on Capitol Hill today, and what he has done to work with us to do this is something that maybe won't get reported, but it has been an honor to actually work in a bipartisan manner to do something that benefits our country. Mr. Ivey is a true patriot and really cares about this community, and this was an opportunity for us to put partisanship aside to do something for our country, and it's been an absolute honor to work with your office, sir. Thank you very much. Our police departments are struggling with crisis-level recruiting shortages. Here in Washington, D.C., for example, the Metropolitan Police Department has the lowest number of officers it has had in the past 50 years. Another example, since 2019, the Chicago force has lost 3,300 officers as of October 2022, and has only replaced around half of those departures. Some small towns that don't have as many resources are even having to shutter their police departments entirely, which is not making this country safe, is making us extremely less safe. We cannot stand by and let this continue to happen across our country, and this is why we need the Recruit and Retain Act. Currently, the DOJ provides grants to state, local, and tribal governments to hire law enforcement officers under the COPS hiring program. The Recruit and Retain Act would leverage the COPS hiring program to ensure the program is responsive to the latest hiring challenges that law enforcement agencies are experiencing nationwide. This bill will reduce the cost of onboarding new officers, specifically fees associated with background checks, psychological evaluations, and other testing. It would also alleviate administrative burdens to clarify application guidance to ensure grants are accessible to all law enforcement agencies. And it will create new opportunities for law enforcement to build trust and interest in law enforcement careers with the local youth. Lastly, the bill will require research into the latest data and uncover new insights into law enforcement recruitment and retention trends across our country. This bill does not authorize new funds or create new grant programs, and only allows for existing COPS grants to be used for recruiting and retaining police officers. I'm proud to say this bill has been endorsed by the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, Major Cities Chiefs Association, Major County Sheriffs of America, National Association of Police Organizations, and National Sheriffs Associations, and others in a partridge and a pear tree. When our police departments are well funded and maintained, our communities are safer, Americans are safer. Let's support our cops. Let's help attract the best and brightest to law enforcement profession like it was when I was growing up. Everybody wanted to be a police officer because it was cool. And like I teach my children, you shake the hands of those that keep us safe every single day. That's why it's so important in the environment of our police officers to live and work in today, and for us to make it better for them. I urge my colleagues to support the Recruit and Retain Act. And again, Mr. Ivey, it's been an honor to work with you on this. I think this is a win-win for everyone in this entire country. And then also, there are some members, Fraternal Order of Police, in our midst today. Thank you so much for your sacrifice. Thank you for your service to our nation. And with that, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the rest of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Natter, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Recruit and Retain Act is bipartisan legislation that takes a necessary first step towards rebuilding law enforcement agencies that have been decimated by staffing shortages in recent years. In the wake of the pandemic, law enforcement agencies across the country have faced a historic crisis in recruiting and retaining qualified candidates, leaving all of us less safe. Research has shown that police agencies across the country are losing officers to resignation or retirement faster than they can hire new officers to replace them. In my home city of New York, for example, the NYPD is understaffed by thousands, with hundreds of officers leaving every month. The NYPD has 3.5% fewer officers than it did 10 years ago, although the city's population has increased. Here in Washington, D.C., the police force shrunk to a half-century low in 2023, even as rates of homicide, carjacking, and gun violence have continued to rise. This is not just an urban problem. Police departments throughout the country, in rural, suburban, and urban areas, are suffering from attrition rates that are higher than hiring rates. We must do something to stem the tide. The Recruit and Retain Act would attempt to do just that by authorizing law enforcement agencies to use community-oriented policing grants or COPS grants for recruitment and retention. This legislation would allow agencies to use COPS grants to remove barriers to entry by reducing application-related fees, such as fees for background checks, psychological evaluations, and testing. The bill would also create a COPS partnership pipeline program that would award grants to law enforcement agencies to partner with educational institutions for recruiting activities that nurture student engagement with law enforcement as a potential career. By creating a local pipeline for law enforcement careers, this program would help agencies regain the trust of the communities they serve, trust that has been lost in recent years and that is critical to building a path towards better, more responsible policing. The bill also requires an in-depth study of the reasons for the recruitment and retention challenges that federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies are experiencing and how these challenges are impacting public safety. Although I am in strong support of this legislation, I hope that we will consider additional measures to enhance recruitment and retention efforts. For example, this bill falls short of the recommendations contained in a 2023 report commissioned by the Attorney General and published by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and Office of Community-Oriented Policing. We should also enact provisions from the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act requiring training on discriminatory practices and requiring law enforcement accreditation recommendations and best practices. This legislation, however, represents a critical first step in addressing the law enforcement staffing crisis, and I am pleased that we have the opportunity to consider this bipartisan legislation to support our law enforcement officers. I want to thank Mr. Hunt and Mr. Ivey for introducing this important legislation. I urge all members to support this bill, and I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. Does the gentleman have an amendment at the desk? Clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Without
HR.
objection, the amendment in the nature of substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purpose of the amendment. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas to explain the amendment. Gentleman yields back.
The gentleman yields back.
Okay. Small technical change to the.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment makes a small change to the short title and small drafting changes that do nothing to alter the substance of the bill. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, co-sponsor of the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I want to thank the ranking member for his endorsement of this bill. I share his view that it's a good first step in the right direction, and we look forward to working on those issues as we move forward. And I want to thank Congressman Hunt, the lead sponsor on this bill, for allowing me to participate and work with him on this. I think it's a key piece of legislation that's definitely needed around the country. You know, I'm in Prince George's County, Maryland, right across the border. The ranking member talked about the challenges of recruitment and retaining police officers here in the District of Columbia, but we're having the same challenge in Prince George's County. And I know it's a challenge for police departments across the country, and many police officers and chiefs will tell you that frequently we're competing for the same pool, and that we need to grow the pool. And one of the things I think we can do is to pass legislation like this that will help attract more people who are interested in becoming police officers. We need to grow that over time. And we also need to make sure we're providing additional opportunities for people who want to go into other types of law enforcement. I sit on the Homeland Security Committee as well. Border Patrol is you know, one of the things they were talking about there is the need for additional officers, you know, to cover the border on the southwest and the north, and you know, all law enforcement across the board is facing some of the same challenges. This is sort of a pre-ROTC kind of program, gives a chance to introduce young people to the law enforcement career, and also from the retention standpoint. I first became a prosecutor in 1990 here in Washington, D.C. Many of the people that came in during that wave are either retired or retiring, and that's part of the challenge. Part of it's the baby boom, part of it's the jump in hiring that took place after crack swept across the country and caused waves of violence. Those people are now leaving. We've got to make sure we do everything we can to replace them so we keep the numbers up. In some instances, we're going to need to grow the numbers of officers who are available and will stay on the force. And I know there's challenges in other respects too. And so part of the reason I was excited about the study piece of this, there's a lot of theories that go around about why officers are leaving. And some of them are right and some of them are wrong, but I'm a strong believer in data-driven public policy. And I'm hoping that this will give us a chance to make decisions that are based on the data that we get back. So with that, I want to thank Congressman Hunt again for allowing me to work with him on this legislation. Thank the chairman and the ranking member. And I would ask all of the members to support this legislation. And with that, I yield back to the chairman. And bless you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for yielding back. Thank you for the God bless you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Sheriff Nels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very seldom do I agree with Mr. Nadler and Mr. Ivey. Well spoken. Police agencies are and have been defunded. Recruitment is down. We all know it. Assaults on law enforcement are up and up each and every year. They're going higher. Our cities are burning across the country, and the American people, I will tell you, the American people will hold those accountable, and they will hold the left accountable for this. I want to express my support for the Recruit and Retain Act, led by my good friend and fellow Texan, Wesley Hunt. Yesterday, these 4 law enforcement officers were fatally shot, and 4 others were wounded while serving an arrest warrant in Charlotte, North Carolina. The officers approached the house to arrest the suspect for possession of a firearm by a felon, and they were immediately met with gunfire. The U.S. Marshal who was killed in the shooting was Thomas Weeks, Jr., 48 years old. He is survived by his wife and 4 children. 2 other law enforcement officers were Sam Pelocci and Alden Elliott. Both were 14-year veterans of the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction. Pelocci is survived by a wife and 2 adult children. Elliott leaves behind a wife and 1 child. The 4th officer killed was Joshua Ewer, a member of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Ewer, who had been with the department for 6 years, fought for his life for several hours before succumbing to his injuries. He is survived by a wife and a 3-year-old son. I also show you a picture of the scum that took the life of these 4 officers. I will not say his name other than scum. Folks, this bill, which expands the COPS grant program to support law enforcement recruitment efforts, is needed now. It's needed now more than ever. As a former sheriff, it would be hard for me to sign up all over again. 30 years. Don't know if I could start all over again. Not in this climate of defund the police and absolute disrespect and authority for the rule of law. These officers, they died as heroes and made the ultimate sacrifice in the service to our country. Take a look at them, folks. I urge my colleagues to honor their lives, the lives of the 4 officers that were injured, and the countless others hanging on my wall outside my office. Support this bill. It's the right thing to do, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized.
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the gentleman very much. Let me offer my deepest sympathy to the families of that community and to our colleague who is not a member of this committee, Congresswoman Adams, whose neighborhood and might be district represents these families and the incident. We know what we have to do in this community. And I'm excited that out of this legislation, out of this community of members of the Judiciary Committee, because we are a community, that we can generate in this month, the month of May, where we honor our law enforcement, we can generate a recognition of their value and our love and affection for them and the tragedy that occurs when they are willing to offer the ultimate sacrifice. My colleague that just spoke is a neighbor in the Houston region. We have seen each other at various commemorations. Some of them have been commendable and celebratory, as you well know, Sheriff, Constable. And some of them have been incidences like this. So let me first of all say that we have no separation when it comes to this vile crisis to stand shoulder to shoulder. We have many mutual friends, and I'm glad to be standing by you during this moment and other moments that we have done so. To the man who has worn the uniform in a different capacity, Mr. Hunt, thank you for leading and joining with our distinguished colleague from the Maryland area. All of us have seen our share of tragedy. In this instance, Mr. Ivey, who I cannot denote that he has worn a uniform, but if so, we know where his heart is, and we know his commitment. And he's worn another badge and uniform in the capacity of serving in the side of prosecution. Let me thank you, Congressman Ivey, for your wisdom on this kind of legislation. There could not be a more appropriate time, but certainly a more hurting time to put this forward. But it is certainly appropriate to have the two of you, Mr. Hunt, Mr. Ivey, and then to have my colleague from Texas. It's three Texans talking in this mode. We wish that we weren't talking in this manner, but in any event, I'm glad to be standing for something that is good to overcome something that is vile. Let me just say to you that this is an appropriate moment for legislation dealing with recruitment. And so HR 3325 is the recruit and retain. I'm very glad to be part of that. With that in mind, I want to make sure that I say to Mr. Hunt to ask unanimous consent to embrace, enthusiastically be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and ask Mr. Ivy to enthusiastically be a co-sponsor of this legislation. Mr. Hunt?
Without objection, and also, ma'am, since you're my parents' congresswoman, I can't say no to this. It's an honor to have you on with us as well. Thank you so much, and I yield my time back to the chair.
It's my pleasure to, I'm going to use that ranking member just to get these last points in here, just to say that this also helps, Mr. Jordan, in community-oriented policing by helping to get people from our respective neighborhoods. It also increases the number of officers that we get that know the people in the neighborhood. It is also important to note that it remedies the problem of getting cop grants into our communities. That is something very important. And we can recruit from our local schools, our secondary schools. We can let the neighborhoods know that we're standing with you. Finally, we cannot wait any longer to be aggressive in our recruiting for law enforcement from our neighbors and our neighborhoods. And I believe with this legislation, this language, this amendment, we're going to see more of our neighbors joining us and extending their hand of friendship to fight the scourge that we are facing and to do it together. That's going to be extremely important. So I want to rise to support, and I want to accept being an enthusiastic co-sponsor of H.R. 3325, the Recruit and Retain Act, or the amendment thereof. We're glad to be part of that. With that, Mr. Chairman, and the leadership of our ranking member, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I hate to sound a discordant note with all of this bipartisan harmony, and I certainly agree that law enforcement is a core function of government, but it is principally a local core function of government. Some local communities have savaged their local police, they've cut their funding, and they're now experiencing escalating criminal activity and police recruitment problems. That's on them. Other communities have fully funded their police, supported them to the hilt, and they aren't seeing these problems. Why should the communities that support their police pay for the follies of those that have not? This gives the irresponsible cities cover for their own policies. They can continue their anti-police rhetoric and actions, and taxpayers who have provided for their own law enforcement in our own communities now have to pay to support them through this grant program. I believe each community ought to make its own decisions and pay for those decisions with their own funds, answerable to their own voters for these decisions. Grant programs, which have very little oversight or follow-up, are completely out of control. They're one of the biggest single budget problems that we face as a country, in a country that is approaching bankruptcy. And they end up robbing St. Petersburg to pay St. Paul. St. Petersburg should pay its own local law enforcement with its own funds and be answerable to its own voters, just as St. Paul should. These grants are disproportionately directed to leftist but politically influential jurisdictions at the expense of everybody else. And the defund the police jurisdictions also are the same ones that typically have DAs who won't prosecute criminals aggressively when they are arrested. So it really doesn't matter if we fix their bad decisions destroying their police departments if the criminals they arrest aren't going to be prosecuted and are merely going to be released back onto the streets. You know, many of my communities strongly support their police and sheriff's departments. They fund them as their top priority. Why should they support cities that haven't and won't through their federal taxes?
Will the gentleman yield?
Just a second. This rewards bad decisions and bad behavior, and it penalizes responsible decisions by pro-law enforcement cities. And yes, I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman to explain to me why this is sound public policy.
With pleasure. First of all, I would note that the premise of your comments, I think, is misplaced based in part on who's endorsed this legislation. Police Chiefs Association of Nebraska, for example, the R Street Institute, National Sheriff's Association.
I don't doubt that.
Association
I don't
of
doubt
Police
that. If you
Officers.
dangle free money in front of anybody, they'll gladly accept it. That's not the problem.
Well, I think it's unfortunate to besmirch those organizations.
I'm
I
not
think,
dispersing them. It's simple
well,
human nature.
and if I might, too.
Free money is
to
free
the-
money,
to
but
the
the
extent
question
gentleman-
is, why would we be taking it from communities that have supported their local law enforcement and given it to other communities that have savaged their local enforcement?
Well, I disagree with that comment, and I'd wait for the moment where you present evidence to back that up. But let's just assume for the moment you're correct. Jurisdictions that don't want to pursue the grant because, in your words, they want to defund the police, won't pursue it.
But wait
The
a
ones
second.
that do want to pursue it, and I bet that would include police departments in your jurisdiction and state, would like to. And I know the gentleman from Texas would like to comment.
Well,
Mr.
Time
McClintock.
belongs to the
I'll
gentleman
yield
from
to Mr.
California.
Thank you, Mr. McClintock. Yeah, I agree. Listen, I was a recipient of one of those COPS grants back when Bill Clinton did it years ago, back in the Richmond Police Department. That's how I got my start. And I would agree, if we're concerned about this money going to agencies that defunded themselves through the liberal city councils and mayors and everything else, I would say we offer an amendment that does not, that those cities are not eligible for these. If they choose to defund their own police based on some type of political posturing, those agencies should not be eligible, in my humble opinion. So now to try to backfill what they got rid of.
Reclaiming my time, I would simply ask, why don't we leave it to each jurisdiction to make its own decisions and be answerable to its own voters with its own funds, rather than throw all of this into a grab bag and open it for those jurisdictions that can grab that money. I have no doubt if you offer free money, people are going to try to get it. But this is destroying the finances of our country. Again, grants are completely out of control. There is very little follow-up on the effectiveness of these grants, and we've got to stop it if we're going to save our country. I yield back.
I'll just take the last 9 seconds. I believe that crime went down significantly after the cops, the 100,000 cops are hired, went down significantly in our country.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last one.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, my heart goes out to the families of the 4 fallen police officers killed in the line of duty in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our delegation held a moment of silence for them. I know the Charlotte community is grieving and coming together to support their family. I also understand that the president will be meeting with the families. And like my colleagues on this committee, I'm grateful to the police officers in my district for keeping our community safe. In October 2022, when a shooter murdered 5 people in my district, Raleigh police officers responded immediately, risking their lives to stop the violence. And I know that my community owes these officers and all others who regularly put themselves in harm's way an enormous debt. But as with any line of work, our policing systems have room for improvement. And I support this bill wholeheartedly. But I also want to highlight an area I hope can become a focus for this committee and for Police Week when it comes to recruitment. Across the country, women only make up 12% of full-time police officers, a statistic that has not changed in more than 2 decades. Despite this, we know that when more women serve as police officers, departments are more effective and can better support their communities. Women face unique obstacles to becoming police officers, including outdated hiring practices that focus just on physical strength, as well as institutional practices that force women out of policing. Incentivizing more women to become law enforcement officers is one solution we should pursue. 2 of the chiefs of police in my district are women, including the chief in Raleigh. That's why I introduced the Supporting Women Cops Act. This bill will establish a national task force on women in law enforcement and require this task force to release a report with recommendations on how departments can hire more women, retain these officers, and help women advance to leadership positions. I'm very proud to support the bill that we're considering today, but my hope is that it is just the beginning and that we don't stop in our efforts to support and improve our law enforcement and recruiting from all populations in this country. And with that, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Ivey.
Yeah, I thank the gentlelady from North Carolina. I just did want to say this. I agree with the point about the 100,000 cops being hired. I think that was one of the best things that President Clinton did during his tenure. And he did it at a critical time. As I mentioned, that's roughly around the time I became a prosecutor and became aware of the need for more police on the streets as the crime wave driven by crack grew. I do want to say this, though. I think the suggestion that trying to limit the amount or access to these sorts of grants, which are principally aimed at increasing the pool of people who are available and interested in becoming police officers, I think would be short-sighted. And I think it would hurt, in some ways, smaller departments more than larger police departments, because larger police departments are in a position to outbid smaller departments. But for all of them across the board, I think we want to get away from the scenario where departments are competing against each other for too limited a pool of police officers. We want to find a way to expand that pool so that police officers are available, whether it's a large police department, whether it's in a big city or the West or the East or the Midwest. We want all of them to have the ability to draw from a pool of police officers that give them a chance to find the officers that are the best fit for their communities. And as I mentioned before, the feds are having problems with this too, including the Border Patrol at the southwestern border. One of the things they say every time we have a hearing in Homeland Security and they testify, we don't have enough folks and we have trouble recruiting enough of them and we have trouble retaining them. So why don't we put this in place? And there's a study at the back of this that will help give us the information we need, the data that we need to recruit more officers, to increase the pool of those that are available, and to retain the ones that we have. Let's move forward with this. As I mentioned a moment ago, police departments from across the country support this. Police Chiefs Association of Nebraska is one in particular, and I would just note quickly that this has already come through the Senate on bipartisan support. Senator Fisher from Nebraska and Senator Coons from Delaware have already led that charge. So let's do the same thing here and vote to get this done today. Let's get it done in time for Police Week. And with that, I yield back and thank the gentlelady.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but let me just say I thank Mr. Hunt and Mr. Ivey for bringing this measure before us. Yesterday, I received a number of phone calls from my local police agencies asking that we support this measure, and like has already been said a minute ago, we have a major shortage of police officers in this country. And their message to me was, Lou, every time we hire somebody, a year later they move to the local police agency next door. I believe that one of the top jobs of government is to protect our citizens. And if there's a shortage of police officers, we have to address it, whether it be with federal or local dollars. For California, as a Californian, I must say that we're a net donor of federal tax dollars to the federal government. So if this is the legislation we need to bring back dollars to my local police agencies to hire more police officers, I'm more than happy to support this measure. And I would ask Rep. Hunt to, add me as a co-author to this legislation. I want to thank you for your good work.
Gentleman yields.
I yield the rest of my time.
Yep, the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I understand the sentiment behind this bill. I'm just going to ask a question rather openly. Is there Article 1, Section 8 authority for us to transfer federal tax dollars to local police agencies? By your silence, I guess nobody else has thought about that. I yield back.
Okay.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed by immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. A reporting quorum being present, the question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. I was waiting for you, Mr. McClintock. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments, and the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I call up, I gotta find it here, H.R. 8146, the Police Our Borders Act markup. And move the committee reported favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 8146.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. The Police Our Borders Act requires the Attorney General to produce a report on the border crisis impact on law enforcement. The report will document officer safety concerns that are linked to increased cross-border movement, such as fentanyl exposure and assaults on law enforcement. The report will also examine the overall burden of the border crisis on law enforcement capabilities and officer morale. We are considering this legislation at a time when the number of illegal border crossings is unprecedented. In just the last 3 years, more than 4 million illegal aliens have entered the United States, and many remain in our country even after committing a crime. Over 500,000 criminal aliens are on the non-detained immigration docket, which means aliens with criminal convictions are out on American streets free to reoffend. Violence against law enforcement officers continues to rise and is perpetuated by open borders policies. This trend is attributable to the Biden administration's open borders policy and a growing culture of lawlessness. The surge in illegal immigration is leading to significant challenges for local law enforcement, who are dealing with the issues such as human trafficking, drug smuggling, and increased gang activity. This also comes at a time when the FOP recorded the highest number ever of police officers shot in the line of duty in 2023. This legislation will aid Congress in addressing the challenges faced by law enforcement. It will require the Attorney General to produce a detailed report on how the border crisis impacts law enforcement by evaluating resource allocations, officer safety, and the overall burden on law enforcement capabilities. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and yield back and recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this year our Republican majority has wasted time passing 3 different but equally meaningless resolutions related to the Biden administration's immigration policies. Today it appears that we have moved to yet another meaningless and poorly written piece of immigration legislation. Just like the 3 resolutions, this bill is full of empty rhetoric that will do nothing to solve the situation at the border. Not a single dollar will go to help our law enforcement agents at the border as a result of this bill. Not a single person will be denied entry to this country as a result of this bill. And not a single community will be made safer as a result of this bill. It is just another stale attempt to demonize and fearmonger about immigrants wrapped in fresh packaging. The bill itself is an oddly written and hastily thrown together reporting bill that claims to require the Attorney General to produce a report on the impact of the, quote, Biden border crisis, unquote, on federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement. When it comes to reporting bills, I am usually supportive. It's important for us to conduct oversight of the executive branch, and reports are an important way to do that. Unfortunately, this bill is riddled with so much misinformation and so many sloppy drafting errors that I cannot support it. It is obvious on its face that this is not a serious document. For example, there is no definition of the so-called, quote, Biden border crisis, close quote, leaving the Attorney General little guidance to assess what the report will need to consist of. Besides the obvious cheap political rhetoric that exposes this effort for the unserious messaging bill that it is, my Republican colleagues consistently complain that they do not trust the Attorney General to carry out their intent. Defining the basic terms that underpin a new report is, as a general matter, good policy. but failing to include any definitions, effectively ceding the parameters of the report to the Attorney General they say they do not trust, makes very little sense. The bill also attempts incorrectly to paint undocumented migrants as being the primary source of fentanyl brought into the country, when we know that this is not true. The vast majority of fentanyl is seized at ports of entry, trafficked by U.S. citizens. Over 86% of those convicted for fentanyl-related drug trafficking convictions are U.S. citizens. Furthermore, cartels are not risking their product on people who illicitly cross the border between ports of entry. In fiscal year 2023, CBP seized approximately 27,000 pounds of fentanyl. Less than 10% of those drugs were seized by the Border Patrol. The vast majority, or over 90% of the fentanyl, was seized by the Office of Field Operations, which mans the ports of entry. Lastly, the bill also asks the Attorney General to report on the resources devoted to addressing the border and the resources that are, quote, not available to law enforcement agencies, close quote. However, at every turn, it has been Republicans who have voted against giving DHS the resources it needs to do its job. In 2021, all but 6 current House Republicans voted against the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which provided additional funding to modernize ports of entry and allow for non-intrusive inspections to combat the smuggling of people and drugs. Likewise, all but 2 current House Republicans voted against providing robust funding for Customs and Border Protection and border security operations in the fiscal year 2023 appropriations omnibus legislation. That bill provided more than $17 billion to CBP, including $60 million to hire an additional 125 CBP officers and $70 million for non-intrusive inspection technology to detect narcotics and firearms at ports of entry. When it comes to the President's supplemental request, which would provide $14 billion for border security, we have not had a single hearing, let alone a vote on the request. The President has requested vital funds for 375 immigration judges and 1,600 asylum officers to speed up processing of asylum claims so that people can be adjudicated in weeks, not in years, as well as funds for additional personnel at ports of entry and technology to stop drugs from coming into the country. As a final indication of just how unserious this bill is, its findings state that Congress should pass and the President should sign into law, quote, strong border security legislation, close quote. Never mind the fact that it was House Republicans who walked away from a bill negotiated by one of the most conservative members of the Senate, a bill that Senator McConnell called the toughest border bill in 30 years, all because Donald Trump told them he wanted an issue for the election, not a solution. You don't get strong border security legislation by passing congressional findings. You actually do the hard work of legislating, but that appears to be far beyond the capacity of this Republican majority. So instead, they are reduced to pointless bills like this that accomplish nothing and are full of misleading information. We deserve better than this pathetic waste of time. I urge my colleagues to oppose this misguided bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back without objection. All other opening statements will be entered in the record. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered, considered as read and become, let me explain it real quick. Yeah, the amendment makes a small change to the short title and nothing further. Without objection, the amendment in the nature of substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text. For the purposes of amendment, the chair recognizes who seeks recognition. Mr. Correa, the gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify a couple of findings that should be part of this legislation. I'm the ranking member of the Homeland Security's Subcommittee on Border Security. As part of that job, I've gone to the border numerous times. I'm about to go back this weekend to talk to some of the frontline officers that are protecting our country. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to be in San Isidro. And as I took a tour and spoke with some of the officers in blue, that is the officers at the border entrance in San Isidro, I went to the holding cells where they had the individuals they had apprehended crossing the border with narcotics. looked over and I saw a young lady in one of the cells. And I asked the officer, tell me about this individual. And they said, yes, just a few minutes ago, this individual had been apprehended with a big load of fentanyl coming across the border. It said this woman happens to be not only a U.S. citizen, but a Marine Corps reservist. And as he said, her life is about to change quite a bit. Latest figures for the last 6 months, 89% of the fentanyl that is apprehended coming into this country still comes across our ports of entry. My amendment is simple, clarifies the facts, and it says 90% of fentanyl or 89% of fentanyl coming into the United States is brought through legal ports of entry by United States citizens. Merely clarifies what we know to be facts, not based on what Lou thinks are facts, but what our Border Patrol officers are informing us to be the facts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple things I want to straighten out. Again, we had some debate earlier on the floor, and the same issues came up. Let's be clear. Let's understand something. There's a difference between immigrants and illegal immigrants. It's that very special word, illegal. We all know what it means. And we shouldn't try to morph that. We shouldn't try to confuse it. We shouldn't try to make it difficult to understand. Nobody on this side of the aisle, I would hope nobody in Congress, has anything in opposition to legal immigrants. Legal immigrants are some of our best citizens. Legal immigrants care and love about this country. They pledge to the flag. They understand the importance of freedom. They're entrepreneurs. They believe in Americanism. They believe in American exceptionalism. They're great men and women. We're talking about illegal immigrants, some of whom are not bad individuals, but all of whom are illegal, and some are bad that are coming from every corner of the earth, and including our enemies, whether it be communist China, whether it be Russia, whether it be Iran, and a whole lot of other countries. We don't know who they are, what they're about, where they're going, what they're doing, but we know there's a danger, and even Biden's FBI director says it's the greatest danger this country has ever faced. So what this bill does, I'm not even on the bill, but you just read it. It's saying you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to report on the effects on law enforcement of illegal immigration. We need to do that. We need to understand it. We shouldn't be afraid of it because it's a problem. And when it comes to some of the bills that were mentioned by my good friend, the ranking member, funding for the border bills, let's not confuse it. It wasn't good funding to button up the border. It was increased funding basically for catch and release by another name. It was funding to move more illegals through faster. It was funding for quicker processing. It was funding to make what is illegal in some way legal. That's not what we want funding for. We want to button up the borders. And the Senate bill, every time somebody's going to say it, I'm going to say what I'm going to say now. It was a bad bill. The only thing worse than doing nothing is to do something that isn't good and pretend that you're doing something that is good. It was a bad bill. It really didn't do anything about catch and release in another form. It didn't build the wall. It didn't expedite to the country of origin. It didn't do anything like what Title 42 was, which could have been modified for today's times and what we need to do now. It didn't stop the flow, the hemorrhaging into our border. It was a bad bill, and it was a fake bill, and it did more harm than good because it didn't tell the American people the truth. And you know what? Why should we be afraid? Why should we be afraid to reveal, which is what this legislation would do, how much hurt and harm to law enforcement illegal immigration has done? Why should we be afraid for our citizens to hear that? Why should we be afraid for anyone to hear what the costs of illegal immigration are? Why should we be afraid to see what the increase in crime has done to our country and to our inner cities? Why should we be afraid to hear about the deterioration in morale that it's caused in law enforcement and the physical harm it's caused to them? That's all this bill does, is tell the truth and lets us see clearly what is happening to our country and what is happening to law enforcement by something that is illegal. We need to stop running away from it. We need to tell the truth, and the only way to fix it is to completely, thoroughly have a full and thorough understanding of what the issues are and what the problem is. That's what this bill does. That's why I'm voting for it. That's why I think there should be bipartisan support for this bill on both sides of the aisle. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join in the ranking member's comments, but I do want to make a couple in addition to that from the vantage point of my being on the Homeland Security Committee as well. I think reporting is fine. I don't know that this bill goes about doing it the right way or puts it in the right department for it to be done. In Homeland Security, there were variations of reporting requirements that are already in place, but also some that have been voted out of the committee by my Republican colleagues on the other side. And I think that reflects the fact that it's more likely that the Homeland Security would actually have the information about what's happening at the border on these specific issues. And so placing it with the Attorney General seems to be a bit out of step, in part for the reasons the ranking member stated, but also because I think it's clear that the primary mission and the information is going to be at the Homeland Security Department. I just want to note, too, Section 3 is for annual reports, but it looks like it's only one report that would be submitted here, and it would be submitted in 180 days. You know, and I just don't know that that would be enough time to get this done, but, you know, again, I think it reflects the hasty nature of how this was drafted and how it was put together. And I know that the reason it was done in this way was so that it could run through this committee from a jurisdictional standpoint instead of going to Homeland Security where it ought to be. But even if we set that aside, the larger issue, I think, is the issue that the Congressman from New Jersey raised and the ranking member raised, and that's, you know, alternatives to trying to actually address the issue at the border. My colleague from New Jersey says the Senate bill was a bad bill, and I know many Republicans share that view. I don't know that this is a really good alternative replacement for that, though. In fact, I think it fails on almost every measure across the board. So, you know, to the extent we really want to deal with the issue, as the ranking member pointed out, there are ways to go about doing it. This isn't really it. And even if we just take it just for the minor piece of it as simply being for reporting purposes, this isn't the right department to do it in. So, you know, we remain open to trying to work with our Republican colleagues to try and address that issue. It's certainly something that, you know, I feel is important to the American people, that, you know, we want to have it addressed, and I'm willing to work with, whether it's this committee or the Homeland Security Committee or any other committee, work with folks who really want to sit down and focus on trying to work something through. And to that extent, I really do want to go back to the Senate bill and commend Senator Langford and his colleagues in the Senate for trying to actually get a bipartisan measure done, something which stands in stark contrast to H.R. 2, in which every Democratic amendment was voted down, at least initially. You know, we're ready to work with you. So let's see if we can do something on this. I'm open to it. And let's go beyond the jurisdictional games and the like and see if we can actually find common ground, give the resources that are needed, whether it's for Border Patrol agents, for additional judges to move these cases more efficiently and you know, get that backlog done. Let's work together on this and see if we can get something done. And with that, I'd yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California, from California seek
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, I'm different, Mr. Cree, I'm sorry. It's a different gentleman from California. I've recognized.
As a matter of fact, I wanted to address a point that my colleague from California.
You are recognized, sir.
made, and that is to note the fact that most of the fentanyl that we stop is at the ports of entry. Well, of course it is, but that's a completely distorted claim. Of course, most of the fentanyl that we catch comes through the ports of entry. We have the most sophisticated detection equipment in the world there. We have scatter X-rays. We can look right through vehicles. We are very good at stopping the stuff at the ports of entry. The dogs themselves are amazing. I watched a dog identify a drug shipment that had been hidden in a gasoline tank in a car. That's how good we are at stopping all of the bad stuff that comes in at the ports of entry. What we don't catch is the fentanyl that comes in between the ports of entry, because between the ports of entry, we don't have any of that equipment. It comes in with the 1.8 million known gotaways that the Border Patrol couldn't stop because they've been completely overwhelmed processing 4.6 million illegals crossing with them. How huge that number is, we have no way of knowing. But we do know this. Because of this administration's policies, all you've got to do is flag down a Border Patrol officer and you immediately get free admission into the country, free health care, free food, free clothes, free legal representation, and a free ticket anywhere you want to go in the country. Then you get free shelter, free education, work authorization within 6 months. You're assured that you will not have to defend your phony asylum claim for many years, and when it is adjudicated and you are ordered deported, you know that under this administration, you won't be deported. All you have to do is wait until the next amnesty. So why in the world would anyone want to evade the Border Patrol? I can only think of two reasons. Either they're hiding a criminal record or they're doing something illegal, and that illegal activity is very likely to be smuggling drugs, and particularly fentanyl. What we do know is that fentanyl has flooded into our country. We are stopping a lot of it at the ports of entry, but we're not stopping any of it among the 1.8 million known gotaways that have violated our borders, while this administration has aided and abetted that activity. I'll be happy to yield to my friend from North Dakota.
Yeah, and just as an aside to that, ports of entry, between ports of entry, U.S. citizens, not U.S. citizens, 100% of the fentanyl is made by the cartels. 100%. All of it's made by the cartels, and that's where it ends up.
Does the gentleman yield? Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes that other gentleman from California, Mr. Correa. For what purpose does the gentleman wish to be recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word and offer an amendment.
Do you have an amendment at the desk?
Yes, sir.
Clerk will report.
And Mr. Chairman, I just am happy to see that my colleague from California agrees with me that 89% of the fentanyl coming into the
point of order. Clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8146, offered by Mr. Correa. Page 2.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. And gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy that my colleague from California agrees with my amendment and the facts as presented as such, and I hope he will vote for my amendment.
Was the gentleman listening to a word that I said?
But if I can, it's my time, sir. It's my time.
It's Mr. Correa's time.
I just wanted to add that these reports are good, and I think the more information, the better. The challenge that we have is a lot of this information that we receive is classified. And so unless you have this information being presented to you in a classified setting, it will distort the facts as they are presented. And so the solutions would therefore not be the most optimal ones that we can apply to address these issues. And to my colleague from the Dakotas that talked about the fact that
Does the gentleman yield for a question?
Sure.
Thanks. I thank the gentleman for yielding. So I've read your amendment, and my question for you is, are you saying that only 11% of the fentanyl that comes into the United States comes between the ports of entry? Is that your assertion?
My assertion is essentially the facts as presented to me by the CBP, which is most of the fentanyl for the last 6 months has come through the ports of entry.
Did they tell you, may I ask you another question? Did they tell you that it came through the ports of entry, or that's where they had the most success in interdicting
They had the most success of interdicting at the ports of entry, and that alludes to the other issue, which is resources at the ports of entry, Mr. Chairman.
So would you yield for just a quick?
Of course.
Yes,
of
thank
course.
you. So if the premise is that 89% is where they're interdicting at the ports of entry, I don't think there's any disagreement that that's where they're interdicting. The question is, why did you then word your amendment to say that 89% of the fentanyl coming into the U.S. is brought through the legal ports of entry when we don't know that that's the case, nor does the Border Patrol know that that's the case, nor does HSI know that that's the case? And why? I just had that classified briefing myself just last week.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that is the facts as they are presented to me by those three agencies that you discussed. And another fact that they've essentially presented to me is not everything that comes across the border, not every vehicle is actually inspected. A very small percentage of those vehicles that are coming across our ports of entry are actually x-rayed, actually go through secondary, are actually inspected by our trained dogs to find narcotics. And as been said earlier here in this committee, those blue uniforms need help. They need resources to be able to inspect more vehicles, to increase the amount of fentanyl that is actually being stopped at the border.
Will the gentleman yield, please?
Of course.
Well, based on what you just said, since we are actually do secondary inspections, very few, we don't x-ray all of them, we x-ray just a small proportion of them. Again, it gets to the statement that you said is a factual statement, because the factual statement, I don't think that's what you're really trying to say, because the factual statement that's here is that 89% of fentanyl that's coming into the U.S. is interdicted at the border. But we don't know what the total nut is coming in. So there's no way to know that 89% is actually being interdicted at the port of entry. What we do know is that of the fentanyl that's being interdicted, 89% of it is at the port of entry, but we have no idea what the total nut is. So it's disproportionately and misrepresenting the facts.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good point. However, what my amendment does is simply state the facts that these are the CBP numbers that have given to us. And based on those numbers on a report, then you can begin to reallocate resources to our ports of entry.
Right.
Again, Mr. Chairman, if a very small percentage of those vehicles are actually being inspected at the ports of entry, you can be sure there's a lot more stuff, bad stuff that's coming into the country. And that kind of data needs to be part of a factual report that you are going to base policy on. That's essentially why I'm asking that this report incorporate this amendment.
Well, so would you yield for another comment? Thank you. I thank the gentleman for this colloquy. I get what you're saying, but this, with all due respect, the way this is worded, I don't believe is consistent with the wording, at least of the last.
Would the chairman be open to rewording this amendment?
It's not my bill, but I think it does need to be reworded to be factual. It's not my bill.
It is factual, but I believe, Mr. Chairman, you're not satisfied with the wording, so we can play with the wording if you would like.
I would love that, but I don't even know whose bill this is, but you're going to need to talk to whoever's bill it is to see if, D'Esposito, you're going to need to talk with Rep. D'Esposito to see if he's content with you messing with his bill.
I'm not messing with his bill, I'm merely putting it through the legislative process.
Well, correct, yes. So thank you, thanks for your colloquy. Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler. For what purpose does he seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
You need to.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Chairman, it is not the practice of this committee or of any committees, so far as I know, to require that amendments proposed be approved by the author of the bill. So that I think if Mr. Correa wants to offer the amendment, he should amend it. committee can debate it, and we can vote on it.
I
And I'll yield to Mr. Correa.
I am offering the amendment, sir.
Yeah, he is offering the amendment.
Okay. Well, I support the amendment. I think it's accurate. And I'll yield to Mr. Correa if he has anything else to say. If not, I'll yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Just on the 89% piece of this, and again, I'm on Homeland Security, and we can go back and forth on the niceties, but when we went to the border, actually, this is what we were being told by Border Patrol agents. And what they also told us was that they wanted to beef up the amount of equipment that they had that they used to scan the trucks so that they'd be better able to find the fentanyl. And one of the key points that they made was the cartels want to take it through on vehicles like cars and trucks because they can carry infinite amounts more through a truck than you can in some individual with a backpack. So I just, just the same, for the same reasons, Frito moves its chips using trucks as opposed to some smaller vehicle. The cartel's doing it for the same reason. So I mean, we can go back and forth about whether, the ports of entry are really a big issue or not, but I think it's beyond clear cut by both, whether it's this administration or the previous administration, that the ports of entry is where most of the stuff's coming through. So, we can go back and whether it's 89 or 90 or something like that, but it's beyond dispute that the very, very vast majority of the fentanyl that's coming in through the country is coming through the ports of entry. I mean,
Gentleman yield.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. So,
Actually, it's the ranking member.
oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
I'll yield to the gentleman.
Thanks for yielding. So I'm troubled that you find this so clear cut, and the reason that we're even discussing it is because of the way the gentleman from California's amendment is worded. Now, I realize you went down to the border once. I get down there regularly, often, briefed often, got briefed just the other day, almost got arrested for being on an Indian nation there that they felt I was trespassing, but I wasn't. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But the reality is, I talked to line agents, I talked to OFO officers, I talked to USCIS officers, and they're going to tell you, we have no idea.
All right, will the gentleman yield for a question?
I'll yield to the gentleman.
When you speak to these Border Patrol agents, they're telling you they have no idea whether more fentanyl's coming through the ports of entry than on these backpacks that individuals are carrying across the border. They're actually telling you that?
Yeah. You know what they're telling me? They're saying we don't know what the total nut coming in is.
I don't know about the total nut, but I'm talking
Well, so how do you determine the proportionality, sir?
Well, they are extrapolating based on the information that they have.
Reclaiming my time. They know because 89% of the fentanyl that is discovered in the basements of basements. I don't mean that. In the undercarriages or trunks of vehicles at the ports of entry, and 11% is discovered elsewhere. Now, one could say, of course, one doesn't know how much is undiscovered, but that's but that is not the point. We know what we know, and that's what we have to base policy on.
Yes. And if the gentleman would yield back briefly.
Yes.
The enforcement policy at the border should be driven by what we know. 89% is a number that we know. When you talk to these Border Patrol agents, you don't have to go down there to talk to them. They'll come up here and talk to you as well, as they do at the hearings that we have in Homeland Security. That's exactly what they say. And they also will tell you that that's why they want the machines to inspect the large trucks that are going through. So as Mr. Correa pointed out, they can't inspect all of them. They want to be able to inspect all of them because they think they will interdict much more fentanyl by doing that.
And
that's what
reclaiming
they're
my
saying.
time,
And it's
that is a
beyond
good
logical that that's right,
And
based on the
reclaiming
numbers.
Reclaiming my remaining 2 seconds.
Gentleman's time's expired.
That is why we are to pass the amendment, and we are to pass additional appropriations for the Border Patrol for fentanyl inspections. And I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time is expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Wyoming Seek recognition.
Strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I would like to ask Mr. Correa, the sponsor of this particular amendment, a couple of questions. But according to this amendment, it states 89% of fentanyl coming into the United States is brought through legal ports of entry by United States citizens. Mr. Correa, how many pounds of fentanyl were brought into the United States or smuggled into the United States between ports of entry in 2021?
Ma'am, I don't have that information.
Okay.
But what I do, the information I do have, if you permit me, is,
Well, no, I'm going to have a couple of questions to ask
Sure,
here.
sure.
So how many pounds of fentanyl were smuggled into the United States between ports of entry in 2022?
I don't have that information. I can
And,
get
and
it
how
for
many
you.
how many pounds of fentanyl were smuggled into the United States between ports of entry in 2023?
Between ports of entry, I don't have that information
Okay,
either.
and how many pounds of fentanyl were smuggled into the United States between ports of entry so far
I
in
don't have that
2024?
information, ma'am.
How many pounds of fentanyl were smuggled into the United States between ports of entry in any of these 4 years by non-United States citizens?
Between ports of entry,
By non-United States citizens?
I'll get that information for you. All of that would be
no,
statistical speculation, ma'am, because you know that's essentially a rhetorical question.
Well, it's not a
what you're
rhetorical
asking.
question because you've put in 89% of fentanyl. You're stating this as a fact, that 89% of fentanyl coming into the United States is brought through legal ports of entry. We have now established that you don't know.
I do have some numbers for you.
You have now established, you do
I
not.
have the information, but not in front. I do have some numbers for you if you'd like me to give them to you right now.
How many pounds of fentanyl were smuggled into the United States between ports of entry?
In fiscal year 2023, CBP seized 27,000 pounds of fentanyl at ports of entry. Less than 10% of the drugs were seized by Border Patrol.
All right,
Which
but
means
how much-
90% of that was actually at ports of entry.
Well, yes, but that's what was seized. That isn't what you state. You're stating 89% of fentanyl coming into the United States. We know that a lot of it wasn't seized because we know over 100.
I
Just
can
hold
amend
on,
my,
hold on,
to
hold
say.
on. Let me
The
Interdict-
gentlelady controls the time, sir.
my time.
Yes, ma'am.
We know that a lot of fentanyl is coming into the United States and is not being interdicted because we've had over 100,000 citizens killed in the last couple of years, correct? So there is absolutely nothing about your amendment that is accurate.
It's absolutely accurate, man. If you would like, and I
89%
might amend my
Gentleman,
statement.
yield.
Hold, no.
I can amend my statement to say interdicted, and that would be maybe acceptable to you?
Well, and so,
Gentleman, yield.
but
That
then you-
89%
let me-
number is what the
I'm
Border
gonna-
Patrol gives
I'm
us.
going to reclaim my time
Yes, ma'am.
because you also state through legal ports of entry by United States citizens. Again, how much fentanyl has been smuggled into the United States by non-United States citizens?
At our
between
ports of entry, I'll get that
between-
number for you.
Between ports of entry.
I'll try to get that number for you, ma'am, but I can get the number at ports of entry
I'm
by
not asking
non-US
about ports of
citizens.
entry.
And I'm giving you the information that's available.
But I'm asking between ports
And
of
I'm
entry.
giving you the
So-
information that will be available.
So it's my understanding is that you don't know.
No, I will get that information for you as it is made available.
Now,
It's not an issue of not knowing. A lot of this information is statistical, and it is based on what the Border Patrol gives us, which is better information than you or I have, ma'am.
Well, no,
This
I
is
can
not
tell
about lose numbers. These are the Border Patrol officers that work for us on a daily basis.
do
They're the
you-
ones that are giving us this information.
Sir, do
Yes,
you
ma'am.
realize that I'm asking you the questions about the drugs that are making it through and that are not being?
And do you realize that my statement is essentially, my amendment is about a factual statement by our Border Patrol officers to make sure that your report is more factually correct.
But
That's all it is, ma'am.
But your statement, there isn't any truth to any
How much of
aspect
this,
of
how
this
much
statement.
fentanyl comes to the northern border, ma'am?
There's nothing about this statement that is accurate.
Well,
We've just
ma'am,
established
it is
that.
accurate, ma'am.
No.
You have not established anything. You merely made a statement.
Yes, we have. And we have because you don't have the answers to how much is being smuggled in that isn't interdicted.
Ma'am, this is a report about trying to figure out what the challenges are at the border. We start by making sure that these reports are as factually correct as we can make them. That's
Okay,
what my
reclaiming-
statement, that's what my amendment is about.
And your amendment is completely inaccurate, and for that reason, I would oppose it.
Ma'am,
Will
we'll
the
talk to
gentlelady
the Border
yield?
Patrol
I'm sorry.
officers
Will the
and see how
gentlelady yield?
accurate or
I'm
not
sorry,
this is.
Mr. Correa.
Thank you.
Your
Will the gentlelady
time has
yield?
expired, and now, for what purposes does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. And the purpose of the amendment is to tell the truth, to reveal the facts as is known. For example, I have worked on this issue and been to the border many times and worked with the State Department, the Department of Justice, Border Patrol. To a person, they have the facts and they know that that which is coming into the country, 89% of it, is coming through legal ports of entry by people legal to be here. There's a common sense reason why that is true. If you have this valuable cargo, you're not going to put it in a backpack on somebody who's likely not to make it across the border. You're going to secret it in trucks and tires and battery cases with people who are legal to be here. It is a common sense thing, and what the good gentleman is trying to do is to invest facts in what is a very politically written piece of attempted legislation. 4 times in here it says the Biden border crisis. Where in God's name was that established? We had a president before Mr. Biden who had his own extraordinary crisis at the border, despicable crisis at the border. The State Department, Department of Justice, Homeland Security, Border Patrol recites this statistic over and over. You should want to be factual about what's going on. And with that, I will yield time to the gentlewoman from Texas.
I thank the gentlelady for her clarity, and I will use time in brevity, if I can, and to say that the delivery, the manufacturing, and the sale, if you will, to the actual consumer of fentanyl is not a playground activity. And it is not an activity that we judge on whether you are red or blue. And that's what they seem to be challenging Mr. Correa on, as opposed to the solution that he is attempting to offer. And I want to commend the gentleman for his amendment and join him on his amendment. But what we have done over the last 10 minutes is an exercise in frivolity. You get a laugh out of it because we're not talking about the issue of the 89% of fentanyl coming into the United States is brought through legal ports of entry. That is the key question that we are fighting. And that is something that we should fight collectively together, as opposed to trying to be in a setting of one amount versus another. So I think the number that you speak to, Mr. Correa, is a number that you've documented either by direct conversation with the Border Patrol agents and as well documented activity by actual hands-on police officers, that they are picking up a total of about 89%, which is a heck of a lot of fentanyl coming into the United States. So I would, my point that I want to make is this amendment is to provide another clarity and information to add to making sure we have the right pile to show the pile up that we need more help, and that fentanyl, as deadly as it is, families that have suffered the deadliness of fentanyl need the help of the United States federal government. That's how serious this is. And so I would join in the effort that he is making and join in the pronouncement of what he is attempting to get and to have added, and to make sure that we add this information to the report that we are working on. With that, I yield back to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
I thank you, and I'll close in support of the arguments just made by the gentlewoman from Texas, by Mr. Correa, the author of the amendment, and just suggest if we really want to be serious about curbing and ultimately stopping the fentanyl deaths in this country, More than 120,000 people a year are dying of fentanyl. You don't have to be an addict. It is being slipped into everything. It's cheap, it's synthetic, it's easy to make. If we wanted to be serious about it, we would want the facts on where it is and how we can trace it. Border Patrol says they are tracing only, X-raying and tracing only about 2%. They have the ability to trace it all if we would give them the resources. Fortunately, in the recent supplemental, you know we did just add resources literally for fentanyl and border police in this issue. Let's stick with the facts. Let's actually try to save lives and not do a political stunt like this. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
This is going to be short, just speaking actually with my friend from Alabama, Congressman Moore here. What would exactly be accurate, and this is not accurate the way it's written now, 89% of the fentanyl seized may come through the ports. There's a lot more than that that isn't seized that gets through. And that's the issue. To say that 89% of the fentanyl coming into America, into the United States of America, is coming through the port, no, that's not accurate. But that it is seized there, what is seized, what we know of, between the borders and between the ports, 89% may come through there. And that's a very important distinction. That is a distinction with a major difference. I hope everybody's following me. I know, Barry, that you do. So that's the issue. So it really is, Chairman, I would maintain that this is really incorrect, that the way that it is written, because it is, though all the fentanyl that's seized, 89% of it may come through those ports. Nevertheless, there's a lot more that comes through that we don't even have a handle on, and that may be through a multitude of other ways getting into the United States of America. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Correa is recognized for UC, I guess.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Van Drew, and that's why I'm going to ask unanimous consent to change my amendment to include the word interdicted. 89% of fentanyl interdicted into the United States is brought through legal ports.
But Mr. Correa, yield for a moment.
Sure.
I agree. If that is what the statement would say, that certainly is more accurate, yes.
That's what I'm asking unanimous consent to amend. Thank you.
Can I,
Well,
yes,
Mr. Van Drew, yield? It might be, it might be technically accurate, but it is highly misleading. What they're,
I'm sorry,
sorry.
Mr. McClintock. No, you yielded back. So, and Mr. Correa, and now, but he did a UC, so now we're discussing UC, so. Oh, we can't discuss, we got to vote on the UC, right? Oh.
I withhold.
Hold on one sec. New driver. The gentleman reserves the right to object, and I recognize.
And I do object.
And he does object. There is an objection, so.
Question.
The UC dies.
Is this unanimous consent to, may I ask a question?
You have a point of order, yes.
Point of order.
Parliamentary inquiry, yes. Go ahead.
Abracadabra.
Yeah.
Is that good? My question, my parliamentary inquiry
Please state it.
is,
We're waiting.
was Mr. Correa just merely trying to amend the wording in his amendment?
Yes, that's correct.
Why can't we just let him do that and then vote on his amendment?
If I may?
Because
Yes.
he can ultimately offer another
What rankles me
amendment.
is he is deliberately trying to mislead people into thinking that most of the fentanyl flooding into this country is coming in through the ports of entry, when in fact, all we're doing is able to interdict it because that's where we have the equipment. We had 1.8 million known gotaways, all crossing the border without any kind of ability to interdict. And so this is completely misleading. and is, I think, deliberately designed to deceive. And I don't think it speaks well of the gentleman, my friend from California.
The thing is, he could just offer another amendment, and so he just wants to expeditiously get us to that point.
So I'm gonna take the gavel back.
Okay.
And
You're interdicting.
I'm going to seize in a minute. Just say, Mr. Correa, do I understand that your UC was objected to, and now you want to?
I'm going to offer another amendment that essentially makes that correct.
You have an amendment at the desk.
Yes, have an amendment at the desk, sir.
Hold on a sec, Mr. Correa.
All right, for heaven's sake, I will withdraw my objection to unanimous consent for him to amend that word in his amendment, so that we can get right down to voting, voting down what is clearly a deliberately misleading attempt.
Unanimous consent for my amendment?
Your new, for whatever you want to amend your amendment with now.
Unanimous consent to amend my amendment.
To read as how, please? Please read it to us.
89% of fentanyl interdicted coming into the United States is brought through legal ports of entry by United States citizens.
Okay, is there an objection to the proposal to amend his amendment? Any objection? Seeing none, it is adopted. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. Now we're on your underlying amendment. And is there any further discussion on that? Seeing none, the question before you is the adoption of the amended amendment by the gentleman from California to the underlying bill. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Appears the noes have it. It appears the noes have it, do have it. So ordered. There is a request for a roll call vote. And just so you know, this is just so you know, this is a vote on the amended Korea amendment to the underlying bill. You got that?
Mr. Biggs, I'd like to.
We're in a vote now?
No, I think I have the right to make a parliamentary inquiry. You're in the.
What is your inquiry?
To clarify the language, this is going into a report, and I don't want members to say this is a Republican amendment. I'm sorry, a Democratic amendment. This is language going into a report. It's only clarifying language, and it says 89 of fentanyl seized is 89% of fentanyl coming.
No, I'm sorry.
Right, that is correct. That was not what you read. Or not.
That's not what Mr. Correa read. He read interdicted into.
That's why I want him to clarify what he read. That's what I'm asking him to do. That. Here it is, sir. Is that
okay? So in a hyper-technical world,
yeah,
the amendment is as is, and we're voting on it. You cannot change the language in the middle of the vote. And now, will the clerk please call the amendment?
That's what he wants.
You're voting on the Korea change, the amendment, the amended amendment, the change that he just made to his amendment that y'all voted by UC. You're allowed to go in by UC. You're voting on the actual underlying amendment as amended. Got it? Got it? Okay, everybody. Please call the roll, clerk, quick, before we forget.
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Issa, Mr. Gates, Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz, Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Bentz, Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden, Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels, Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley, Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran, Ms. Lee, Mr. Hunt, Mr. Fry, Mr. Nadler, Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson-Lee. Ms. Jackson-Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Liu. Ms. Jayapal. Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. McBath. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush. Mr. Ivy. Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant. Ms. Ballant votes aye. Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Benz votes no.
Clerk will.
Mr. Chairman, there are 10 ayes and 12 noes.
The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Who seeks recognition? The question before you. Question before you is the. Question is on adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Ayes appear to have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. Reporting quorum is being present. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it. Bill, a roll call vote has been requested. The clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Issa. Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Biggs.
Aye.
Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock. Mr. Tiffany. Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Bishop. Ms. Spartz. Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Benz. Mr. Benz votes aye. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Gooden. Mr. Van Drew. Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley. Ms. Hageman. Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Moran. Ms. Lee. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Fry. Mr. Nadler. Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson-Lee. Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Liu. Ms. Jayapal. Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. McBath. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush. Mr. Ivy. Ms. Ballant. Ms. Ballant votes no.
Mr. Armstrong?
He's voted.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Roy?
Am I recorded?
You are not recorded.
Aye.
Mr. Roy votes aye.
Gentleman from Tennessee?
Mr. Cohen votes no.
Gentlelady from Texas?
Ms. Escobar votes no.
Gentleman from California is not.
Mr. Isa, you're not recorded. Mr. Isa votes aye.
Gentleman from Maryland?
Mr. Ivy votes no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there,
Hang on. Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 14 ayes and 10 noes.
The bill is, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment, the nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. This concludes the committee's business for today. The committee is adjourned.